Parshas Toldos, the challenge with the Parshas of Sefer Bereshis is not to find what to say, but find there's so much to say. What do you discard and what do you use? And these are very rich Parshas, and they make for a lot of interesting limudim. The pasuk begins, as we all know, Ela Toldos Yissocher ben Avram Hoilid es Yitzchak. So these are the descendants of Yitzchak the son of Avram Hoilid es Yitzchak. So there is an obvious difficulty with this pasuk, and that is that it seems very redundant. The pasuk says these are the descendants of Yitzchak the son of Avram, but and then it says Avram Hoilid es Yitzchak. I mean, that is absolutely redundant. What is the pasuk adding by saying Avram Hoilid es Yitzchak? So there are all the Mefarshi of Chumash go on this difficulty, including the Ibn Ezra, who writes, "V'yeshamim kitam Hoilid es Yitzchak, shahayu daimel aviv." So Ibn Ezra says one pshat that the pasuk is trying to tell us that he was daimel, he was just like his father. It was obvious that Avram was his father's because they looked very much alike. That's one pshat. V'yeshavim kitam Hoilid Gidel Veriba. So the Ibn Ezra says there's also a different explanation, because the word Holid does not only mean to give birth, but it also means to train and to be mechanech and to educate. Gidel Veriba. Kmo Yultu al Birkei Yosef. So that's what the pasuk is saying. Not only that Avraham Avinu was his biological son, but he went ahead and trained him and grew and was mechanech him and raised him and inculcated in him Avraham Avinu's values. But perhaps the most famous pshat on this pasuk Avraham Hoilid es Yitzchak is what Rashi says in this week's parsha, and that is Rashi quotes that Shadei Leitzonei Hador, the scoffers of the generation would go ahead and say that this is not really Avram Avinu's son, because all of a sudden the Sarah could never become pregnant, and therefore she was with Avimelech. And all of a sudden she became pregnant. It must be that this is not Avraham Avinu's son. This is Avimelech's son, which means it would go ahead and destroy the whole genealogy of ancestry of Klal Yisrael. So therefore, the pasuk is going ahead and emphasizing and sort of to disabuse the notion of the Leitzonei Hador, the scoffers of the generation, that this was not Avraham Avinu's son. So I once heard in the name of Rav Pam Zecher Tzadik Livracha that he was wondered why Rashi, why does he use the lashon the Leitzonei Hador? A leitz, as opposed to, is not a comic. A leitz is a scoffer, a person who's a cynic, who's very cynical, and goes ahead and tries to tear down all that is important and holy. So why does the pasuk refer to these people that were trying to convince that this is not really Avraham Avinu's son? Why not call them by their proper name, Rishayim? These were the evil doers of the generation. They're going to go ahead and spreading this false rumor, which has such grave historical implications. Why don't you call them Rishayim? So Rav Pam said an interesting concept. Rav Pam said the reason they're not called Rishayim, they're called Leitzim, is because nobody believed this. Nobody, their contention that this was Avimelech's child and not Avram, ridiculous. Why is it ridiculous? Because Avraham Avinu, we know, was able to bear children. Avraham Avinu had a son, Yishmael, from his maidservant Hagar. So it's not like Avraham Avinu was infertile, and we know that he was able to have children. So to go ahead and say that no, this wasn't Avraham Avinu child, it must be Sarah's child because Sarah was barren all these years, and all of a sudden she became pregnant. So therefore, they're referred to as late sonim, because nobody believed them at all, and therefore all this was a mockery, a late sonis, because this did not change anybody's mind. So I think there's an important lesson for all of all times, and that is that what this really is about is revisionist history, which means that people who live through a certain period or a certain event, they know exactly what happened. Okay, if you were alive for the Kennedy assassination, you know that it was Lee Harvey Oswald that killed Kennedy, and in those days, I still remember. I was in yeshiva, but I still remember. I've seen this over and over again. How Jack Ruby went ahead and shot Lee Harvey Oswald. So we know, we lived through this. We saw this. We know what it's about. What happens, unfortunately, is as time goes on, people begin to say, "Hey, wait a minute, is that really what happened?" And they try to revise what history is. So therefore, says Rav Pam, the people of that generation obviously knew that this was Avraham Avinu's child, and they dismissed this Leitzonus, this mockery of the Leitzonei Hador. But sometimes what happens is you go 10, 20, 50, 60, 100 years later, and people begin to question, is that really what happened? So a classic example of this is that, the first president of the United States that I was really aware of was Dwight Eisenhower in the 1950s. He was elected in 1952 and once again in 1956. And I was a child then. I by no means a grown-up, but I do remember that everybody thought, at least the Democrats thought that Eisenhower was really not presidential timber. We used to think that all he did was play golf all day, and it was the country didn't do anything. The country was stagnant, and Kennedy came along and went ahead and said, "We have to get the country moving again." That was our perception of Dwight Eisenhower. It was wrong. Eisenhower was a very capable man. And if you have any doubt about, all you have to do is use the history of World War II, specifically D-Day, and how Eisenhower commanded the whole thing. There was never an assembly of man material, of ships, planes, etc., like the D-Day invasion of Europe. That was all under the command of Dwight Eisenhower. And even though he was not the man that did his strategy, but the balancing of all the different, this general, that general, should Montgomery do this, should Patton do this? You have to be a very skilled person to do it. But what I think that you see the foresight of Eisenhower was that when they went ahead and they conquered Europe, and they saw the concentration camps, Eisenhower told his staff to take pictures and movies of this. Because as he said at that time, one day I'm not going to use his language, some person is going to come along and say, and it did not happen. It's a hoax. Now, how could you say that? We know people that survived the Holocaust, had the tattoos on their arms, etc., etc. But such is revisionist history. you can have a person today in 2025, Holocaust deniers. So what this teaches us is that even though sometimes we know the facts are undeniable, we've lived through it, but nevertheless, people come along and change history. And Eisenhower had the foresight to go ahead and record it, take movies of it. The famous pictures of the Holocaust survivors there stacked on a bunk bed. That's a reality, because you have to worry about revisionist history. And that is what Rashi's saying over here, that they were scoffers. They were leitzonim, because even though what they said at that time did not take hold, but you never know with the passage of time what people will in fact reinterpret this. And in fact, I don't know the Quran at all, but from what I am told, in the Quran, the quote, the Bible of the Islam religion, it says that it was Yishmael who was the subject of Akedas Yitzchak. It wasn't Akedas Yitzchak, it was Akedas Yishmael. Now, how can you say that? The answer is you go ahead, instead of using the Torah, which is God-given, you go ahead and you invent a new Bible called the Quran. And rather than having Yitzchak, Akedas Yitzchak, it's Akedas Yishmael. And there are millions of Muslims walking around today believing that it was Yishmael that was about to be sacrificed. We know that's not true. How can you say that? Yes, you can say that. And that is why they refer to as the Leitzonei Hador, not the Rishai Hador, because even though they did not, whatever they said was dismissed, but that was for that generation. But for the future, Avram Holidas Yitzchak to disabuse this notion that this was anything other than Avram Avinu's own child.